The topic of smartphones in schools has become an important one in the last couple of years. School districts are trying to set proper policy that has a positive impact on students and their learning. The problem is that many in education feel that cell phones hinder that process. Pleasure to be joined right now by Angela Duckworth, who's a professor of operations, information, and decisions here at the Wharton School. She is part of new research coming out about this topic specifically and what we're seeing in our schools at the moment. Angela, great to talk to you again. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good.
It's interesting. You and I were talking about this before we started this interview. This has obviously become a very important topic in and around the school right now.
I think not only is school cell phone policy an urgent topic, it may be one of the last bipartisan topics there is in the universe. So whether you are red or blue, whether you are pro teacher union or pro charter school, like we have not found the educator who doesn't care about this issue and who doesn't feel like we should be doing more than we're doing right now.
Right. And so obviously the component of learning is a big one here, but as you just alluded to, there's an element of this is how the teachers are dealing with this and being able to try and work through their normal process during a day.
The default policy for, several years, just I'm talking about nationwide, right? Just sort of like, what are K-12 schools doing about phones, in America? For a long time, the default is that every teacher reigns supreme over their classroom, and that includes phones. So if you are a teacher who says, "I don't care, and you can have your phones on your person," great, that's your classroom. But then when the students go to the next period, they might have a teacher who does care, and then you have to put your phones in a cubby and so forth. And that is actually how much of American education works, right? But in the case of phones, I think what we have is what some scientists call collective action trap. That is where individual decision making, individual willpower is no match for the problem. And I think what teachers have been saying in our survey data, which I know we're here to talk about, is that they need help. They can't just legislate cell phone policy as a teacher on their own, separate from what the school is doing as a whole.
Okay, so let's dig into the research because this is part of a larger research project that you're on is ongoing right now. This first part was a survey about some of these policies.
So there is a national survey that is up and running right now. We're like a convenience store, 24/7. We never close, and it lives at www.phonesinfocus.org. And any school teacher in the United States, we're looking for public school teachers, K-12, can log on and in a confidential way share in a matter of minutes what the policy is at their school, and from their perspective, how's it going? We're really interested in looking for changes in policy that predict changes in outcome. So on the same survey, you're also asked whether your policy at your school has changed in recent years, and if so, how. And what we're seeing in the 20,000 plus responses that we've already received from public school educators across all 50 states is an important pattern, which is that the stricter the policy, the happier the teacher. And again, in this cross sectional snapshot, the stricter the policy, the less distraction there is for students in terms of their academic work.
One of the things you brought up to me beforehand, and it's an interesting component of it, when you're thinking about these rules, the proximity of where a student can hold their phone is also a factor in this as well.
One way to appreciate the importance of physical distance on psychological distance, and there really is a kind of a law in psychology that, more physical distance creates more psychological distance from temptation. One way we can appreciate this is to consider our own relationship with our phone. I don't know any adults who have a completely unconflicted, I've got this relationship with their own phones. This is not a teenager problem. I think it's
Right.
not just a kid problem. And if I have my phone, 1 foot away, like that's a different level of temptation than if I, for example, have my phone in another room. Or if you really want to get me off my phone, if you put my phone upstairs and I have to walk up 8 stairs to get it. Of course, it's trivial, right? Like, well,
Yeah,
how hard could that be?
yeah.
But yeah, that makes a huge difference, and that may be why we're finding that schools, for example, who require their students to keep their phones in their hallway lockers, which are not, 1 feet away from them when they're in class. They're typically more than 30 feet away from them, and in fact, they can be on a different floor. Those schools perform extremely well in the outcome data that we are collecting.
And one of the other components of the policy angle on this is uh, not just how, from potential classroom to classroom, that different teachers have different thoughts about cell phone policy, but within the school structure itself, K through 12, that you may come up with one policy in grade school, one policy in middle school, and another one in high school.
We find a pattern again across the United States that actually I can't speak for the whole team. It surprised me. So when you think about cell phones, you typically think about teenagers, and you think about social media. Again, you think about teenagers, and when you worry about teenagers. But we're finding that the schools that serve teenagers, which are the high schools, right? That's grade 9 through 12, 14 to 18 years old. Those schools paradoxically have the least strict rules. So perhaps arguably just when students need the most support in regulating their attention, their impulses to stay focused on academic work, which in prior research shows teenagers recognize that academic work is good for their long-term future. This is true across the board, across socioeconomic status. A students, F students, everybody knows that school is good for them. And so it is in the teen years, perhaps when students need the most support and when temptations are strongest, that we give them the least support in terms of school cell phone policies. Only 1 in 4 schools in our sample at the high school level has a bell to bell policy, meaning you can't use it from the first bell of school to the last bell of school. So all day, all away. That's only 1 in 4 high schools, but when you look at the younger grades, it's flipped. So when you look K-8, that's more like 3 out of 4 schools in our sample.
But still, the component of mental health is part of this discussion as well, because this is going back to just screen time in general with our kids.
Yeah, the fact that I wanna, begin with and is just to say it is a fact that there is a mental health crisis among youth. Sometimes I'm asked, like, "Is it just an artifact of the data?" "Is there something in report?" I'm like, "No. Kids today really are struggling. They're struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with loneliness, and they're struggling with the symptoms of depression relative to other generations of kids, in years past. So the connection between teen mental health and screens is a big topic that we're not going to have time to discuss entirely today. But I will tell you this: now that we have thousands and thousands of educators, and hopefully, and by the way, if you're listening to this and you know anybody who's a school teacher, please send them to our phonesinfocus.org survey. But now that we have some responses, we can find these schools and talk to them. And I will tell you what the principals and the teachers are telling us. They say that, yeah, test scores, are influenced by cell phone policies. So are the number of books checked out of the library going up in schools that have lower, or I should say more restrictive policies. But social emotional outcomes, how are kids feeling and how are they relating to each other? That's the primary outcome for many of the educators that I'm speaking with. They say when we started a policy that really restricted phone use during school hours, and that includes where kids keep it, they made eye contact with each other more.
Yeah.
They talk to each other more. You actually hear noise in the cafeteria, the din of young
Yeah.
people interacting with each other. Before, it was like you could hear a pin drop because the
Yeah.
kids would just be silently, scrolling through something with their thumb and shoveling food into their mouths. So I really, I don't want to sound like a Luddite because I think the role of technology is complicated and it's certainly got a lot of affordances that we don't want to ignore. But I worry about young people not interacting with each other, not having realistic, sensible ideas about what is expected of them, and I worry about their attention.
So, as you're collecting this data right now, what are the next steps in the process for this research?
Well, there are tens of thousands of middle schools and high schools in particular. As I mentioned before, a lot of the action is at the higher grade levels because that's where the policies are the least restrictive. And as a developmental psychologist, I will tell you that these are our most impulsive years of life. So we are thinking that maybe, just maybe, every middle and high school in America might participate in our survey. That would be at least one educator from every middle school and high school in the United States going at some point this month, this week, maybe today, to phonesinfocus.org. And if we really do that, if we accomplish that goal, then we will have a census of what is going on in this country. We're going to match that to standardized test scores, to attendance data, also to measures of climate and student engagement and well-being. And then we are going to deliver the results to the educators who answered the survey and, to legislators who are making important decisions about the specifics of cell phone policy and how to optimize youth well-being, youth engagement, and yes, youth achievement as well.
Angela, great to talk to you again. Thanks very much.
Always good to see you.
Thank you. Angela Duckworth, Professor of Operations, Information, and Decisions here at the Wharton School. And again, that website, phonesinfocus.org.